food price controls, an idea that might sound very appealing until you're hungry. So recently, a political candidate, a presidential candidate, floated out the idea that to stem off the inflation, which is government created and has been now rampant for 4.5 years, we're going to institute price controls on food. Now, whether or not this happens, I just want you to understand the agricultural economic reality, how devastating this can be, especially for the poorest among us. So what would happen in the case of price controls on food items? The producers and processors of food would then be fixed on what they're allowed to charge. If they're only allowed to charge a price below their cost of production, they're of course going to stop producing. You might say, but the government can force them to produce. Well, that's usually never worked out well. Let's look at the collectives instituted in places like China during the Great Leap Forward from 1958 to 61, or the 1929-1930s collective that was forced by Joseph Stalin in Soviet Russia. Productivity declines rapidly when people are forced to produce something that they have no vested stake in producing. In other words, profit, the ability to make money, usually drives productivity, not coercion by government forces. So we got that reality. What about the retailers? The retailers that are working on 1% to 2% margins. Yes, the good thing about this price control talk coming out of a presidential candidate forced people to realize that in general, retailers work on very, very thin profit margins, a couple of percent. Whole Foods being about twice that at like 4 or 5%. The reality is, it's very, very bad to think that retailers are going to stock and sell food that they're losing money on when they already work on such thin margins. What will they do? They'll just not stock the food. They'll not sell it. Oh, but the government can force them to. Sure. And then what the government will do is force store closures, because stores will say, okay, we'll sell this at a loss, but we're going to go over here and charge more on these other things. Therefore, it forces up prices for you to pay on maybe detergent or bed sheets or any other thing you might buy when you're at the store, because the store is already losing money on this. You can say, yeah, but I can just go to a different store. Well, if all stores are forced to sell at reduced prices or below profit prices on food items, they're going to jack their margins somewhere else until ultimately they close stores. And this is the big point I want to make to you. Price controls harm the poorest among us, because all of a sudden stores will be closed in what are already called food deserts. You remember hearing that from Michelle Obama? Well, rural areas and poorer urban areas are going to be the first to close, because if their stores can't make money on other items, they're certainly not going to stay open to lose money on those few food items that the government controls the price of. You see, food price controls historically have harmed the poorest among us. The political elites don't go without food. Go back in history, look at the Great Leap Forward, when China under Mao Zedong collectivized farming and made communism the rule in production agriculture. Production plummeted, but the cities and the political elites kept their food supply while the peasants starved. 30+ million Chinese died in a 3-year period under the Great Leap Forward, not to mention the aborted births or miscarriages due to starving peasants. What about under the Stalin regime of collectivization? What about, there was millions of starved then also, at least 5 million Russians starved during that Russian version of the Great Leap Forward. What about Venezuela, where the average citizen has lost 38 pounds since Hugo Chavez instituted such things as price controls in Venezuela? See, the point is, historically, price controls have never worked. What they have done is harmed the poorest among us. Political elites don't go without food. Rich people circumvent the system or can afford to buy up or operate in black markets. The poorest that these price controls are supposed to help end up suffering and paying the price of price controls. Usually, a free market system where there is supply and demand and a number of competitors creates the best food availability and prices for the citizenry. Remember this also, the United States of America, even after government-induced inflation, which we've been dealing with now for almost 4.5 years, even after that, the United States of America still has the most affordable, the most abundant, and the safest food supply in the world, even given this rapid run-up. What's the answer? Let the market work. Allow production to happen. Allow retailers to compete. Make sure that there are enough competitors so that we don't have a monopolistic system, and do not ever fall for the gimmick of price controls on food. Damian Mason talking about agricultural economics, coming at you here from De La Rosa Farms. Thanks for tuning in.